The sudden halt to missile exchanges and the declaration of a ceasefire caught the world off guard. After weeks of tension, accusations and retaliatory strikes, both Iran and Israel agreed to stand down. The ceasefire announcement came late at night, accompanied by calm statements from both sides, neither claiming victory but both signaling satisfaction. For many observers, this marked an unusual end to a conflict that had seemed poised to spiral out of control. But what truly shocked international analysts wasn't the ceasefire itself. It was the fact that Iran managed to force Israel into silence without triggering an all-out war. The question echoing in diplomatic circles was simple. How did Iran manage to do what few thought possible? How did a regional power under heavy sanctions and international scrutiny outmaneuver one of the Middle East's most advanced militaries without crossing the threshold into open warfare? Iran's strategy wasn't rooted solely in missile launches or brute force. While it did demonstrate an ability to respond with precision, its real weapon was layered deterrence: economic, cyber, political, and psychological. Iran leveraged its network of regional allies and proxy forces, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen, creating a multi-front perception of readiness that forced Israel to consider the cost of full escalation. These actors activated in limited ways, signaling capabilities without pushing boundaries. Iran also executed sophisticated cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure and defense networks, disruptions not publicized widely but understood clearly by Israeli intelligence. These quiet but decisive moves blurred red lines without violating them. It was war by other means, strategic ambiguity combined with calibrated pressure. The result was a complex, invisible battlefield where Iran communicated strength without overstepping into direct, all-out confrontation, ensuring Israel had more to lose from speaking or striking than from standing down. At the core of Iran's maneuver was its mastery of narrative warfare. Tehran controlled the narrative internally and externally, presenting itself not as an aggressor but as a force resisting provocation. Through state media and diplomatic channels, Iran portrayed Israel as the reckless actor, escalating tensions and targeting civilians, whether or not those claims stood up to scrutiny. This resonated across sympathetic audiences in the Middle East and even in parts of Europe, where growing discontent with Israeli policies toward Gaza and the West Bank made Iran's positioning unexpectedly effective. Iran also capitalized on shifting global sentiment and war fatigue, particularly as Western powers remained mired in other international crises. In this fog of asymmetric information, Tehran used silence, leaks and denials to maintain strategic control. And while Israel remained militarily dominant, it increasingly appeared reactive, not proactive, a dangerous position for a country built on the doctrine of deterrence through overwhelming response. Israel, meanwhile, found itself in a dilemma. Military analysts and politicians were caught between maintaining deterrence and avoiding a larger war that could quickly draw in Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iranian-backed militias from Syria and Iraq. With the threat of simultaneous multi-front conflict, Israeli officials recognized that a massive retaliation could open vulnerabilities across the northern and southern borders. Iron Dome and other defense systems, though advanced, were not limitless. The home front civilian morale and political cohesion were all fragile. Israel's political leadership, still recovering from internal protests and coalition instability, understood the risks of appearing weak, but also the costs of escalation. This led to a calculated silence. Israel chose not to claim victories, not to show wreckage from Iranian strikes, and not to respond publicly to cyber intrusions. In essence, it swallowed a strategic insult to avoid swallowing a regional war, something it has rarely done in the past. What made this scenario so exceptional was the shift in balance, not of firepower but of initiative. For the first time in recent memory, Iran dictated the tempo. It set the rules of engagement, controlled the timing, and forced responses. Iran launched symbolic missile attacks, some intercepted, others intentionally missing major targets, designed more to test systems and calibrate reactions than to destroy. It was a deliberate psychological campaign. Every move was a message, and every pause a statement. Unlike the shock-and-awe tactics used in past conflicts, this campaign relied on precision strikes and media manipulation, both foreign and domestic. By doing so, Iran redefined the terms of confrontation, stripping Israel of the narrative edge and rendering its conventional superiority temporarily irrelevant. Tehran's restraint wasn't weakness, it was discipline, and in many ways the most powerful demonstration of dominance in modern geopolitical strategy. The cyber dimension of this conflict was particularly decisive. Over the course of the confrontation, Iranian-affiliated cyber units targeted Israeli communications, logistics, and civilian infrastructure. These attacks, while not catastrophic, were highly disruptive. Rail systems were delayed, power grids saw momentary failures, and sensitive data was accessed in ways that forced emergency responses from Israeli cyber defense teams. Crucially, many of these events never made headlines. This was by design. Israel didn't want to appear vulnerable, and Iran didn't want to trigger retaliation by taking credit. It was a silent, simmering front, far from missiles and airstrikes, but just as effective in forcing recalculations. Cyber warfare leveled the playing field. It allowed Iran to bypass Israel's air superiority and strike directly at soft targets with precision. The cost of these intrusions was psychological as much as strategic. Israeli citizens experienced security even if they didn't fully understand the source. Beyond the cyber attacks and the proxy threats, Iran's use of diplomacy as a weapon deserves close attention. Even as tensions peaked, Iranian diplomats were visible across major capitals, from Moscow to Beijing to Ankara, delivering calm, rehearsed messages emphasizing restraint and regional stability. They made no direct threats, but always reminded their audiences that Iran would respond if attacked. This performance of diplomacy helped project rationality and steadiness, contrasting Israel's silence and secrecy. Tehran understood that perception shapes outcomes. By acting as the cooler head, Iran secured tacit support, or at least neutrality, from many global players. This restrained Israeli options, particularly in the United Nations Security Council and among European allies. Sanctions were not increased. War crime accusations didn't materialize. And so Iran gained international space while limiting Israel's diplomatic maneuverability, forcing it to play defense not only on the battlefield but on the global stage. One cannot overlook the domestic political calculus on both sides. In Israel, prime ministerial leadership faced public backlash over security missteps and was under pressure from both hawkish and moderate factions. Any further military escalation would risk greater internal political fracturing. Conversely, Iran's leadership used the confrontation to galvanize internal unity. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps portrayed their actions as a triumph of Islamic resilience and intelligence. Iranian state media broadcast carefully curated footage of missile launches, defense drills, and public rallies. This domestic victory, real or manufactured, gave Iran confidence to stop short of total war. Iran didn't need to win on the battlefield, it had already won at home. Meanwhile, Israeli leaders had no easy way to declare victory without inviting questions they weren't ready to answer, including the extent of Iranian penetration into Israeli systems and deterrence. The ceasefire terms themselves were vague by design. Neither side released full documentation and media statements were heavily sanitized. But diplomatic sources confirmed that intermediaries, particularly Qatar and Oman, played a key role in back-channel talks. The United States, while publicly aligned with Israel, encouraged restraint behind closed doors, wary of further destabilizing the region. The agreement reportedly included an informal understanding: no more cross-border strikes, cyber restraint, and a pause on regional militia activity. Crucially, Iran agreed to scale down visible movements of GC forces in Syria, while Israel agreed to halt airstrikes near Damascus. These quiet concessions underscored the truth behind the ceasefire. Both sides got what they wanted. Iran silenced Israel diplomatically and symbolically, while Israel bought time to reassess and reinforce. It wasn't peace, but a pause, a recalibration shaped more by silent pressure than by overt military victory. The media response to the ceasefire was mixed. Western outlets focused on the sudden calm and the success of international mediation. Middle Eastern media, particularly those aligned with Tehran, declared it a victory for resistance and Iranian deterrence. Israeli media, meanwhile, walked a fine line, avoiding too much detail, reluctant to admit any losses, and focusing instead on resilience and the success of defense systems. The result was an echo chamber of conflicting narratives, each telling a different story. But analysts noted a subtle shift. Israel's usual position as the dominant actor had been blurred. Its silence was louder than any official statement. This change wasn't lost on its regional adversaries or its allies. For the first time in decades, the perception of Israeli invincibility had taken a dent. And in geopolitics, perception is often the most valuable and fragile asset of all. Looking ahead, the long-term consequences of this confrontation remain uncertain. While open war was avoided, the dynamics of regional power have clearly shifted. Iran demonstrated that with discipline, indirect power, and strategic communication, it could control escalation and extract concessions. Israel, though still militarily superior, faces a new challenge: how to respond to an adversary that doesn't need to fire the final shot to win. The rules of engagement are changing. Cyber power, narrative control, and proxy leverage now rival tanks and jets. In this new battlefield, silence can signal strength or weakness. Iran's ability to impose a ceasefire while silencing its rival without firing the final word marks a milestone in modern warfare, or leaves both sides rethinking old doctrines. And for the rest of the world, it's a lesson in how power is wielded not just with weapons, but with restraint, calculation, and a masterful sense of timing. If war is a contest of wills as much as of weapons, then this round went to Iran. Its message was clear. It can push back, dictate tempo, and walk away without firing the last shot. And in doing so, it forced Israel into a silence that spoke volumes. While missiles stopped and cities exhaled, the real shift was strategic. Iran's victory wasn't won in rubble or retaliation. It was earned in deterrence, perception, and timing. The world may not see parades or peace treaties, but the implications will echo in war rooms and chancelleries for years. As both nations retreat to recalculate, the new rules of regional power have been drawn not by battle but by brinkmanship. Iran didn't escalate the war, it ended the chapter on its terms, and that in today's hybrid warfare age may be the most dangerous kind of power there is.